When you think of developer Neversoft, you might first think back to all of their Guitar Hero sequels that they worked on, along with establishing and continuing the Tony Hawk series from the PS1 to the PS3. During the PS1 and PS2 generations, this studio could really do no wrong. They created a very fun and successful skateboarding series that started on the PS1. They even went outside of their comfort zone and created the underrated and the very first open-world Western game with gun. Marvel even gave Neversoft the keys to their Spider-Man franchise. And during all of this time, Neversoft would be working for Activision, but this relationship did not start with Spider-Man or even Tony Hawk. It began when an in-house Activision studio could not deliver on a project, and Neversoft were the ones to come in and rescue it. Join me as we take a look back at Apocalypse. During the PS1 generation, many games were jumping headfirst into the 3D space. In many ways, these developers were trying to find out what would work best within this area. Activision's in-house Santa Monica studio planned on working on an action game for the new console. This project was going to be very ambitious, especially for the hardware at the time. These developers also wanted to use the talents of a big Hollywood actor and feature them as a dominant role in the game. This resulted in Activision contracting with Bruce Willis. Bruce would lend his voice and his likeness to the project. Apocalypse would be a buddy cop game where the player would control a character and the friendly AI would be Bruce Willis. Throughout the course of development, the studio was having a difficult time getting the AI to interact well with the player. The developers even debated on including a two-player co-op mode, but they ultimately did not explore this as they felt that most people would only want to play as Willis. After 3 years of development, the publisher was not happy with the progress. Activision debated on canceling the project altogether, but due to the large amount of money they spent to get Bruce Willis, they wanted this game finished and shipped. As such, Activision looked to an outside studio to finish this game. This is where Neversoft Entertainment came in and was given this project and told to complete it in 1 year. Neversoft even hired some of the prior employees to work on it. Much of the original vision was dropped as Neversoft took a simpler approach to making a 3D third-person shooting game. It would be very arcade-focused with weapon and item pickups. The goal was to keep the game simple and fun so that this could be completed within their time frame. Within 1 week, the developers had a playable section of a level, and Activision was pleased with how much fun this game was. The game went through another change through focus testing. During these tests, the conclusion was that people only wanted to play as Bruce Willis. So with all of Bruce's dialogue recorded as the partner, Neversoft just made the decision to only include Bruce's character into the game and remove the buddy cop aspect of it. In many ways, this was a very troubled development, and it really speaks to Neversoft's talent that they were able to come into such a mess and save this game. This was still a young studio and they were able to get the job done. In November 1999, Apocalypse was released to the world. Apocalypse is a third-person twin-stick shooter. The game is heavily focused on forward-moving action. The game throws a lot of enemies at you with plenty of explosions. There's a few different weapons that you can pick up and switch to them on the fly. There is some platforming as well, and while not the strongest area of the game, it is mostly decent and allows for some verticality to the areas. Apocalypse is simple, fun, and enjoyable, essentially a good weekend rental. The game is best played with the analog options. This way it acts like a mostly modern twin-stick shooter. So the left stick will be for your movement and the right is to change which direction you are shooting in. You can also crouch to use some cover, but it's mostly used for rolling to avoid damage. You can jump for additional options along with the platforming sequences. And that is pretty much it for your movement options. You have a decent variety of guns that you can use. Your main gun is a machine gun that will never run out of ammo. Throughout each of the levels you will pick up additional weapons like a particle beam, missiles, a flamethrower, along with a few others. These weapons have limited ammo and are really useful for the tricky situations or boss fights. While in a limited supply, you have a smart bomb that will clear the entire room full of foes. The action is set up like an arcade game. When it comes to the actual action, it's really enjoyable with good pacing. The weapons feel pretty good with decent sound effects. What enhances the experience is how many objects can be blown up, along with having enemies with their heads or body parts being blown off. It is delightfully over the top and very fun.
Why can't we all just get along?
Spoil the war to be your head.
The bulk of the gameplay is focused on the gunplay, with a few small diversions. There are a few instances of needing to dodge different traps. Along with this, you will need to dodge the spotlights in certain levels. In the prison section, there are tripwires that can trigger alarms, and if you spot them, you can dodge them to make this section easier. One aspect about the game that I really enjoyed was how there are hidden areas within it. Since the game uses a fixed camera, it allows the developers to hide these secrets in certain areas. Sometimes the secrets are hidden off screen, or they can be found in destructible hidden walls. While the game is mostly focused on a forward-moving linear experience, there are parts that provide you with two different paths to take. There's really only a minor difference between the two paths, but it is appreciated. I really enjoyed how the game changes its camera presentation throughout all of the levels. It will range from presenting the action up close to the character, from a bird's eye view, or like a side-scroller. This helps to keep the presentation of the action interesting and prevents it from being static. There are some jumping sequences, and while it isn't the best platforming in a game, it is appreciated that you can grab onto the different ledges. The game is full of boss fights as well, and they are pretty fun. They have their own ins and outs with some really good presentation. You will fight different horsemen along with other vehicles. There is a story with a bunch of short cutscenes. The story isn't that engaging, but it is enjoyable nonsense, along with some being really goofy at times. Apocalypse is a very simple yet enjoyable game. The action is very straightforward, and the campaign is short and sweet. While most of the action is enjoyable, the game does have a handful of issues. The first thing you will notice is how the camera movements can be a bit herky-jerky, so it isn't as smooth as it could be. I love the changes in the presentation, but sometimes it can feel a bit jarring. There are a few parts where the camera will get in your way and hurt your vision while in combat, but mostly the fixed camera works well. While it is cool that Bruce Willis voices his character, he only has a handful of one-liners and he often repeats himself in the levels. The lines are not that funny and they will get annoying after a while. The platforming is mostly fine, but the fast movement can make it feel just a bit too loose, where you might miss a jump because of this. I do think if a double jump was used in this game, it would have helped to alleviate this issue by allowing you to use the second jump to course correct. There are a handful of cheap platforming moments where the ground breaks, and if you fall, you will instantly die. This stuff really comes down to really fast reaction time or trial and error. The cutscenes are really silly and dated, but the movement can look really stiff, along with the cutscenes having bad sound mixing. Many of these flaws are notable, but the quality arcade action is present throughout. While this game doesn't really do anything new for the genre, it is a quality game that presents itself well, and has good, simple gameplay. It does lack the staying power, as there are no additional modes or unlockables, which is why this is the perfect weekend rental. Apocalypse is a pretty fun game with enjoyable action. With the game implementing a twin-stick shooting design, the game holds up very well and feels like something you would have seen featured on the Xbox Live Arcade. The story is enjoyable nonsense with some goofy cutscenes. This is a fun title that, when put into context with the troubled development, really shows how Neversoft could get the job done and get it done well. When they took over the project, they were under a strict time limit, but little did they know that this project would open the door to a fruitful relationship with their publisher. This was the game that got Neversoft the job to make Tony Hawk. While there might be issues with remastering this title today with potential licensing issues with Willis, I do think that this would be a pretty easy game to release today since it controls and plays very well. Either way, Apocalypse is an enjoyable title. Thank you very much for watching.